call the meeting to order. This meeting of the Board of Internal Economy will come to order. The first thing we have, of course, is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they approved? Madam Chair?
Mr. Speaker, just before we commence, I just wanted to share that I know that there's been some information in regard to the outdoor rink. There has been a tremendous response to that outdoor rink, and our government's really excited about this initiative. And what's more, that Canadians are going for a skate on Parliament Hill. We believe it will provide people with a great opportunity to celebrate Canada's heritage while they get some exercise. And we have heard the feedback to our plan. We have listened and heard the excitement and are looking to keep the rink open for longer. So I just wanted to state on the record that we have listened to the desire to want to keep the rink longer, and the government is working to make that happen. Thank you, Mr.
Personally, I'd be delighted if it were open all winter.
Excellent.
Thank you. All right, let's carry on. Business arising from the previous meeting. Then we'll go. Of course, when we left a few weeks ago, we were on the Parliamentary Precinct Long-Term Vision and Plan, Sustaining the Information Technology Systems and Facility Assists, and Monsieur Robey was leading a presentation on that topic. And so we'll turn the floor back. On va donner la parole à Monsieur Robey.
Mr. Robey, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me the opportunity to continue my presentation that we started last time. If you have any specific questions with regard to the financial aspects, I also have a senior advisor next to me who'd be happy to answer your questions, as well as the CEO. So Darren will be here today since Susan wasn't able to come. He could talk about the spaces and the equipment. If you have any specifics on that, Darren can answer them.
Why we're here today. So we're here to obtain the approval of the board for the funding to operate, sustain, and maintain the life cycle of the building components and connectivities elements that were implemented as part of the long-term vision and plan. If approved by the board, this will allow the Hawk administration to fulfill the requirements of the roles and responsibilities documented for the House as part of the MOU between the House and PSPC that was signed in 2003. It will also serve to rebaseline our budget that was approved for these elements in 2014-15 by the board. The elements that were approved at that time were for $12 million. And it will also sustain the original decision by the members of this board to implement these facilities as per the requirements that were approved in 2003. En plus des obligations contractuelles, les budgets.
In addition to the contractual obligations, the budget, I just want to reassure members of the committee that all of the requests are here to provide more benefits for parliamentarians, since we've got better equipment and we can offer better services to Canadians, the offices, and will be available for constituents, and we'll have better equipment. We also have to think of work, health, place safety. We've got investment for that, and we also increased security in recent years to meet the requirements of parliamentarians and their personnel.
Je voulais juste apporter aussi quelques visuels.
Just want to give you a few visuals so you can see really what we're talking about here. These investments were done to make what we had temporary in the past to become permanent. All of these temporary installations were outside of the buildings. We had to use a temporary building. If you look at the next slide, all the cables were installed for a temporary period, and there's also health and safety issues at stake here. So the equipment we had was out of date because they had been in place more than 20 years. So that's why we looked at this equipment and updated it.
Well, I just wanted to show some visual. These were actually pictures from the West Block. So these are actual pictures from the West Block before the renovation started. So I just wanted to give a sense of the perspective, sir, of why we did this. So we're here seeking funding for two major areas of investments. La première, c'est ce qu'on appelle l'équipement.
First is what we call equipment. So there's furniture, art, artifacts, specialized air conditioning, aeration systems, specific water purification systems for the house. So the responsibility of the house to provide. So we want to be able to support the services we offer to parliamentarians. And there's also connection elements as well. If you look at the next slide, I'll give you some visuals here. You can see what we're talking about. So there's interpretation booths and systems, also presentation systems, so we can really better get a look at what we're talking about. And there's also video conferencing systems that allow us to communicate with our constituents who can't always be at meetings. We're also talking about audio and control systems that allow us to speak within buildings, and also it'll allow Canadians to see what our system is like. So this is what we're talking about today.
That were made since 2000. $128 million were made between 2001 and 2016 for these investments that were transferred to the House of Commons. And then from 2017 to 2019, an extra $74 million will be transferred to the House. And this is to support the move from 12 buildings in 2000 to now 27 buildings that we have to support on the precinct. Most of these investments, 45% of these investments were made directly for the chamber and committees. 32% were made for the campus connectivity, so linking the 27 buildings that are there, and 21% for security. So this is where the actual funding is going as it relates to these 128, close to $200 million in 3 years. Specifically, what you're seeing on this slide here is what was approved by the board in 2014-15. So in 2017-18, we are currently spending $9 million for supporting and maintaining and operating the connectivity elements. We're seeking an additional $2 million next year. If you look at the distribution of the costs, 48% of these costs are directly related to maintaining and supporting these investments, 37% for the life cycling, and salaries represent 12% of these costs that are required to operate these systems and these facilities that we have put in place. When it comes, lorsqu'on parle plus spécifiquement,
we talk specifically about maintaining buildings and rooms. In 2014-15, there was $3 million that was approved roughly by the board, and now we're looking at $6 million. Why did we request this? Because several investments were done more than 20 years ago, and now they're expiring in coming years. If you take, for example, the Justice Building, it's now been 17 years since there's been any maintenance, so several of the floors will need to be updated in coming years. On average, would like to replace 2 floors a year for some buildings. For example, if you look at the Justice Building, there are 20 floors that could be repaired. So this is an investment that will have to be done over the next 10-15 years just to maintain these buildings.
The board at the last meeting was basically to seek the initial investments, again, that were approved by the board in 2014 of $9 million for connectivity assets and $3 million for component assets. And we're seeking additional funding yearly as per the layout schedule for both the components and the connectivity assets. So this is the presentation that we had made. We've added some visuals, sir, And we'd just like to open up for questions as we didn't have time last time for questions.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Je vais d'abord, monsieur Rodriguez.
Thank you very much. I would ask Mr. Rodriguez to speak. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our committee, and thank you for being here with us today. Two questions. A general one first. First, you're talking about maintenance and life cycle. I'm not sure I understand the difference between maintenance and life cycle, how they're different. Second, you're asking for additional $8 million, correct? We're asking for an additional $8 million, yes, for next year. When I look at the table, I don't really pull this out from there. How does this break down? I just want to write your questions down. So to answer your question, what we call maintenance is a support, and a life cycle is kind of what, if a piece of equipment has a life cycle of 17 years, like most equipment does, after 7 years, the equipment we bought has to be replaced. It has to be replaced. And so then we have to reinvest in capital to be able to replace the equipment that is no longer supported by our providers. That's what's referred to as life cycle. What type of capital are you talking? The capital cost is what? The capital investment, if you look at it. If you take, for example, the networking, the connectivity, the capital investment, if you take, it was $3.3 million that we asked to replace equipment that is now outdated. This equipment, or for components, there's $3 million. So there's the first $937,000 in capital investment. In terms of maintenance, these are costs that have to be paid every year. So it's kind of a license. Sometimes you have equipment. We have to pay for additional support to suppliers when they offer these services. And these services represent roughly 48% of our budget this year. So we have contract with suppliers, and these represent 50%. So this is in line with industry standards. We validated these figures with accounting firms and with external consultants. I don't know if you've looked at the historical figures. I don't know, for obvious reasons we have to look. What happens in time is that IT suppliers and licenses have changed. And sometimes we used to pay a fixed cost and then until the item was replaced. But now when you buy it, you have to pay annual fees to upkeep it. So we had to readjust our budget to pay these annual costs so that we can benefit from the licenses we purchased. I'd also like to add that roughly 48% are maintenance costs and the other 30% are support costs, additional support costs, because we're not equipped to have all the necessary things in place if something breaks down. So sometimes we use external companies that represents roughly 18% of the budget. The capital investment, as I was saying earlier, well, that reflects the figures that I've presented. Does that answer your question? Yes. Yes. Secondly, how do you break down the $8 million you mentioned? For 2018-2019, the additional $8 million represents an additional $239,000 for networks. We're looking at everything television, audiovisual. We're asking for roughly $900,000 for everything that involves telephone and communications. We're looking at $911,000. We've reduced security costs by $150,000, and we're asking for $6 million for maintenance and renovation that is necessary for some buildings, such as floors inside the Justice Building. This represents roughly $3 million and $1.5 million per floor in the Justice Building. Thank you. Mr. Julian. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for all the tables that we have in the binder.
I'll start with the overall amount. I just wanted to ask if you could confirm, over the 3-year period, the request is actually for $31,744,987. That's the cumulative costs, both of the connectivity and the components and facilities. Is that the total amount? I'm taking this from the various requests and pooled them together, and it would be helpful, I think, for requests of this nature that we actually get the full amount over the 3-year period, rather than having to calculate it up on our own.
Annual basis, there'll be 20 million next year, 24 the year after. The total is a total of 30 million. So the increase,
$144,987.
Cumulative, sir.
That's the increase over a 3-year period. Okay.
Yes.
So that's good. Thank you for clarifying that. So the two questions I have, actually following up on Mr. Rodriguez's questions. First, in terms of connectivity, this is a very helpful table, the Annex D, which talks about total capital costs. The connectivity costs for 131 Queen were $5.8 million. Valor was $7.8 million. Sir John A. Macdonald Building was $6.2 million. That's the connectivity costs. How are the connectivity costs calculated out? I assume there is a difference between connectivity costs when we're looking at a building that has as its primary function meeting rooms as opposed to offices. But is there an overall benchmark that we use in terms of calculating what the connectivity costs will be?
The cost that you're seeing, sir, in Appendix D are the actuals costs that were transferred from PSPC for each of these initiatives to the House. So these are the actuals. This is actually the actual invoices for the different services that were purchased. The reason why you're seeing some of the costs are higher than in some of their buildings is some of the facilities, old multi-purpose rooms or committee rooms. Yeah. So if you look at the connectivity cost, the average connectivity cost for a committee room is around $1 million. If you have broadcasting facilities, it's around $1.5 million per room. And so if you imagine that we have 19 rooms, you can do the mathematics of the actual total costs. And that's why some of the buildings where there's only office space, the costs are actually lower for the amount because they just represent basically networking and the telephony costs. They don't include some of the audiovisual and the broadcasting costs that are included in buildings that will hold these facilities, such as Valor, 131 Queen, West Block. These are specific facilities that hold these costs.
Yeah, thank you for that. But what I'm actually getting to is we're looking at, in terms of an increase in connectivity costs, about $11.6 million over 3 years. And I'm interested in knowing how that is calculated. We had an initial budget that was set by the BOIE. I understand that is changing, and that's why you're coming before us today. But how is that $11.4 million calculated out? And that's why I referenced the actual costs. You're absolutely right to say when we're talking about Johnny McDonald or Valor, those were actual costs. In terms of the estimates, I'm interested in knowing what formulaire, quel type de forme on utilise.
Type of formula do you use to estimate these costs?
Is first, we've taken all the assets, okay? We've cataloged all the assets, and we've assigned a depreciation cycle. So most of the assets that touch connectivity are around 7 years. life cycle for them. So what we do is we take the 7-year life cycle for each of these assets and we spread them across the 7 years as far as where investments need to be done. And these numbers, sir, are taken from benchmarks. We're using North American industry government standards that are used to benchmark them, and we've actually distributed these costs over the 7 years in order to create a reasonable cost. But some of them, what's happening is why you're seeing some increases in some years versus others is that some of the buildings are coming to the end of their life cycle period. They were done, there was big chunks, such as, for example, Valor. If you look at Valor, it was actually built 7 years ago, so a majority of the facilities over the next year will need to be revamped from a technology perspective. There's actually 2 rooms that we're planning to do at a cost of $1.7 million over the next 2 years. So that's how it's done, sir. We're taking industry benchmarks as it relates to the life cycle period, and then after that we're distributing it across the different years, and we're leveraging industry standards to establish these benchmarks. Does that answer your question, Mr. Julian? Or
that does, and that leads me to my last question, which is around life cycle estimates, because a considerable amount of the $20 million over 3 years for components and facilities is part of an increase in life cycle estimates. And you've alluded to this a couple of times, Mr. Obey, that the life cycle is 7 years. I assume that's not for all components. I assume there's a table of components that are different, whether we're talking about tables and chairs or electronic components. So what table do you base the overall life cycle evaluation on?
so for the components, we use a different life cycle period, sir. For the facilities, the shell of the facilities, we use a 15-year life cycle. For example, the costs that you're seeing in 2019-18 are for the replacement of facilities that were built 17 years ago. So Justice, as an example, we're using a 15-year life cycle. We're going to be looking at 2 floors in that facility, which one of the floor is expected to cost $1.2 million. Another floor at 235 Queens is expected to costing $2.4 million. And these are the average cost, average life cycle time frames that we're looking at, sir. So for components, we use different life cycle durations, and again, we're using benchmarks with the accounting firms. So furniture certainly don't have a 15-year, but different furnitures have different life cycle periods. But the building shells themselves and the floor and the facilities within the floors that we need the life cycle, we're using 15 years, sir. And for components, the major elements are the starting of renovation of specific floors that were done more than 12 years ago now, sir.
Is it possible to let us have copies of your life cycle tables?
We'll certainly bring that back,
I think that's
sir.
helpful both for this analysis, but also for future analyses.
And if you look, sir, in Appendix C, you'll find the distribution of the investments that are made also as relating to components. The major elements are outlined there in 2018. You'll see the duration of these facilities. So these represent, out of the $6 million, it represents about $4.6 million. For 2019-20, represents the $6 million itself. You'll see, so we're touching facilities that are 15 plus years. These are the ones, but we'll certainly provide, sir, the life cycling for all the components tables that we're using.
Mr. Julian, do you mind if I don't know if you're done on it, but I wanted to follow up. I wanted to clarify something or ask Mr. Obey to just explain for us a little in more detail about when you're talking about doing a floor in the Justice Building, for example, doing what exactly? I mean, I don't mean everything, but let us understand what you mean.
So if you look, the MOU states basically, sir, that the PSPC is accountable for the shell, the mechanical system, the electrical systems that are specific to the buildings. When we need to reconfigure the floors, for example, for bringing ministers, and so the reconstruction of the floors and the cabling that is required and any specific systems that we require within the floors, such as battery systems, all of that. These are all the specific components that we are accountable for. So in Justice, we are taking on the responsibility, for example, to redo some of the floors. So in that process, we're going to relook at the configuration. So we have to tear down some walls, redo the carpeting, redo the painting, and revamp some of the furniture if required within these floors.
would you not be responsible for that if it weren't for the fact that there were technology aspects required? My
The reason why I'm responsible for it is I'm also the person responsible, sir, for the long-term renovations and the allocation of space.
Okay.
So this is why I'm seeking, sir, both roles as the CIO and also as the person doing the assignment of the facilities, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Strahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly on the issue that was raised by the government House leader at the outset. I would say if the Board of Internal Economy does have some oversight for the $5.6 million temporary ice surface, I think Conservatives would certainly welcome the opportunity to talk about whether having that within a stone's throw of the longest uninterrupted ice surface in the world, stone's throw away. We'd welcome that opportunity to have that here, but I see you shaking your head that perhaps is Canadian Heritage's function. So, anyways, donc, merci pour votre présentation.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question with regard to the video conferencing system for the committees. Are there committee meetings that are cancelled or affected because there isn't enough equipment or employees for this right now? Or is it a future problem you're looking at? In the past, Mr. Straw, it was a challenge. In the past, we didn't have enough equipment to be able to offer video conferencing. If you look at 2014-15, there were 7 committee rooms only that were equipped with video conferencing. In 2017-18, we now have 13 rooms that are equipped. And 18-19, we're looking at 50 new rooms with video conferencing with the West Block that will be equipped to be able to offer these services and to allow committees to have witnesses from outside.
Not only upgraded equipment, but there's a request for full-time equivalents as well. How many are we looking at to provide that function for parliamentarians?
So in 2014, sir, we had sought 2 video conferences resources to support the requirement at that time, and we were also using temporary resources to support us. But now that the demand has grown so much, like we're seeing an increase of over 65% of committees now using video conferencing, we're seeking 2 additional FTEs, sir, to provide the video conferencing requirements that are there right now based on the number of new facilities that will be supporting this, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Monsieur Robert, merci beaucoup. Is it the pleasure of the board to adopt the estimates? I see. Agreed. Adopted. And now, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
To the 2016-2017 annual report on committee activities and expenditures. And in a moment, as the room becomes, or the space becomes available, we will welcome Ms. Scroll, along with Mr. Eric Jantz, the Clerk Assistant Committees and Legislative Services Directorate, and Ian McDonald, Principal Clerk Committees and Legislative Services. Ian's another technology guru, some of you may know. Although he may not be here to talk about that. Scroll, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the board. It's first opportunity to come before you, so I thank you for the opportunity. So my presentation today, of course, will be relatively short, and knowing how busy an agenda that you all have. And I'd be pleased to answer questions following the the presentation. So I'm pleased to be here as the chair of the Liaison Committee and supported, of course, by Eric Jans as the clerk assistant responsible for the directorate and Ian MacDonald as principal clerk in the directorate and clerk of the Liaison Committee that you all know very well. So as members of the board are all well aware, committees are a well-established part of how the House of Commons functions and are an important part of the day-to-day work of many members of Parliament. As a result, the board provides resources for committees to accomplish their activities, and the board delegates to the Liaison Committee the responsibility to allocate the resources made available amongst the various committees. The report before you today is the fiscal year end report for 2016-17 from the Liaison Committee that was presented in the House on June 16th. The Liaison Committee generally tables 3 such reports over the course of a fiscal year, roughly following the parliamentary calendar, with reports generally presented a few weeks after the summer recess, winter recess, and a third and final report each year in June. In this report that you have for each committee, there's a short narrative description of their activities, a series of tables which include a breakdown of related expenditures, including expenditures by study, expenditures related to travel, if any, and a summary of the number and hours of meetings, the number of witnesses, and the number of reports presented to the House covering the period of the report. The final stages of this report contain summaries across committees and some comparison between fiscal years. Members of the board will undoubtedly be interested in the information contained in the report in order to get a sense of the level of committee activity during the last fiscal year, which you will see was a busy one. However, this report is also on your agenda today because of a practice began in 2013-14, where the annual report of the Liaison Committee will be reviewed by the board and, if agreed to, tabled again by the Speaker in order to meet the requirements of the standing order. The standing order requires the board to table an annual comprehensive financial report outlining the individual expenditures of every standing, special, and legislative committee. By preparing a single report that meets the requirement of both the Liaison Committee and the board, the process of preparing these 2 reports has been made more efficient, which is a goal of all of us at this table. Members will see that in 16-17, committees held 1,385 meetings, met for nearly 2,584 hours, heard from 6,192 witnesses, and presented 172 reports to the House. So as you will see in the last bullet in your report, there's a bit more detail in the graphs that are on the following slides. The expenditures approved by committees for all of their activities totaled $3.26 million in 2016-17. In addition to the Standing Committee, this report also includes expenses related to special committees that do not fall under the Liaison Committee, specifically the Special Committee on Electoral Reform and the Special Committee on Pay Equity. This information is also included so that all committee activities are included in one location to facilitate access and to ensure transparency. To complete the presentation, I will simply go through the remaining slides, each of which has information from the Liaison report that compares information in different categories over the last 5 years. First, the board will note that the number of meetings is more than 240 meetings higher than the next highest year, which was 2012-13. And on the next slide, we can see that these 240 meetings actually meant nearly 750 more hours of meetings than in 2012-13. So committees have all been extremely busy. The last slide in the presentation does contain a statistic that you may find very interesting. The number of witnesses in 16-17 were significantly higher than in any other recent year. So there are several likely reasons for this increase. In part, this is likely due to the level of committee travel over the past year, and to approach many committees have adopted while on the road of reserving a time for audience participation, which has proven to be very much appreciated. This, in addition to the generally high level of activity, including 2 special committees, would appear to have influenced the amount of meetings of witnesses in the last year. This concludes my brief presentation, Mr. Speaker, and to the board. If you have any questions, we would be pleased to answer them.
Okay. Premièrement, j'ai M. Leblanc, après ça, Mr. Julian.
I have Mr. LeBlanc, then Mr. Julian, Mr. Straw.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madame Scroll, for your presentation. I read in the binder the report that you tabled.
Correctly, you identified, if you look on page 74 of the English version of what you submitted, it shows a significant increase in 2016-17 as compared to previous years. I do recognize that in the first year of a new parliament and then in an election year, it necessarily will be different. That's why I thought the 2013-14 comparison was a better one, and that was the one that you referred to in your presentation. Maybe you could elaborate on, for people who would wonder about the significant increase. The special committees are a privilege of the House to set up a special committee. That obviously is done pursuant to a process in the House of Commons, and for perfectly worthy initiatives, I think the two that you mentioned. But elaborate on, or if you want to add something to what you did in terms of the number of hours the committees met, but more importantly, the travel. I remember in previous parliaments, for a bunch of reasons, including in majority, probably, I understand in a minority government it's always more complicated for committees to travel in some cases. But committees, as I've seen and heard, have made decisions approved by the House to travel more outside of Ottawa to hear from Canadians in communities that are often not accessible or even expensive to get to if you're thinking of northern or remote communities. The cost of traveling there would be different than a large urban center. I'm wondering if you would just elaborate on why the number just on the chart appears to have gone up. Am I correct in thinking it's, and again, one of the other pie charts showed the travel being a significant increase?
Thank you very much, Mr. Long, for the question. There was an immense amount of interest in traveling. It was a new parliament. Many of our colleagues were excited in their jobs, and to do the very best job required, they needed to do the travel in order for them to become familiar with the issues that they were asked to report out on. I must say to you that we did look at ways, because we had so many requests coming in, of just how we could tighten the system up. So when different committees are coming before us, we now ask them to come to the committee for an overview of whether or not the committee will be receptive to their request, rather than have them come with a budget prepared and all of that work that goes into that, when sometimes there's always limited finances and you have to make the appropriate decision. So we have the committee chairs come before us with an overview, and if the committee members feel that it's an appropriate request, they're then directed to go back and to come forth with an actual budget for approval, so that we can gauge on a regular basis just how much is being spent. But there has been a huge interest in travel over and above the special committees that, of course, electoral reform being one of them, and the pay equity a second one that was required. Mr. Janice, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Perhaps just to reiterate, as Ms. Crow just mentioned, there has been a desire by a good number of committees to consult Canadians, and sometimes even outside of Canada. It is, in fact, a four-step process before a committee is authorized to travel. The first step is for the committee, all the committee members, all the parties represented on the committee, to decide that they would like to embark on travel. Then that request has to make its way through the liaison committee. Thereafter, the whips have a say in it, and finally it requires a House order. So it's a pretty stringent process.
We have a reputation as being a pretty intimidating bunch. So they don't come looking for authorization unless they're pretty confident in what they're going to be doing.
So, no, and thank you, and that's certainly my understanding as well. Perhaps just a final quick question. Am I correct in understanding that a number of committees also undertook travel in the United States? There's no doubt that that relationship is important to Canada, and the relationship between parliamentarians and American legislators, both at the national and arguably the state level, can be important as well. Am I correct in understanding that some of that increase would be committees deciding, with the approval of the House, of course, to travel to the United States for their work. And a final thing, perhaps, I know just from Member of Parliament travel over the last number of years, there have been efforts and significant efforts that have reduced the cost of Members of Parliament travel rather dramatically in some years by using, for example, flight passes and so on. I assume that there are fairly rigorous efforts to keep the actual, once the decision is made to travel on a certain itinerary, perhaps just give us a sense of what efforts are made to ensure that the costs are as modest as can be, reflecting the itinerary that the House would have approved.
A cap has been put on the membership at 7. Many of committees come in and ask for 10 members to be able to travel. It's more or less, everyone knows now, come in asking for 7. If you come in asking for 10, it's not going to happen. Doing everything possible to try to allow the committees to achieve their goals, but to keep costs always in mind. And I would guess that about half of the committee travel was to the U.S., to Washington in particular, for the committees to be able to do really important work on behalf of the government's agenda as well. Mr. Jens, do you want to comment?
Maybe just one thing to add to that. The new process that has been put in place that Ms. Groh just described, the two-phase process to allow committees to seek a budget, results in most cases, the decision as to whether or not the committee travels to be made earlier than it was perhaps in the past. And of course, the earlier that we have that authority, the earlier we can book flights and make arrangements. And of course, the earlier you can do that, the cheaper the flights are. So that has an impact then on the budget.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much, Ms. Groh. It was actually a report I enjoyed reading, having sat on a number of these different committees. So my question will be around the process that the Liaison Committee uses to vet requests from committees. You've mentioned some of the aspects. Mais j'aimerais juste mentionner...
I just wanted to mention one thing that I find very interesting. If you look at the number of hours that committees work, it's more or less in line with the amount of money that these committees spend. Let me explain myself. The Finance Committee is, of course, at the head of the list with 157 hours of work over the past year. The second one on the list is Government Operations, 147 hours of work. And then you have Trade with 127 hours of work. So these are committees that work the most often. So I think it's important when you look at all of these figures. The leader for these expenses is OGO, which spent 340,000 hours. International Trade was 278. And then you have Foreign Affairs as well, right before Finance. And they're both around $250,000. You also have hours of work here. So what method do you use to filter these results? If there's a committee that's not very active, I would imagine or hope that they were not allowed to spend more money. And do you take this into account in your calculations and in your approval process? And second, and perhaps you don't have the answer to my question, have we already calculated the operational cost of a committee that does not travel and that has no special meetings and has no witnesses? Just the basic expenses for the meetings throughout the year. If you look at interpretation, clerks, all the salaries of the people who participate in the work of this committee. What would the cost be for taxpayers? I've never looked at these estimates, and perhaps it's not up to the Liaison Committee to look at this, but I would find it interesting to know how much money it costs just for a committee that does not travel or just holds meetings.
We'll probably ask the clerks if they'll get that information for you. because I'm not sure that that's something that we have access to today. On your first question, we have a schedule worked out and a layout of all of the different committees that come before us. So when the committee is making a decision, they know how many times different committees have traveled and the ones that have not traveled at all. And that's taken into consideration with the requests as well, in an effort to be as fair as possible so that all committees that want to travel will have that opportunity. So the committee before it, when we have our meetings, has that schedule in front of them showing exactly how much was spent, how many meetings were held, and so on. Things like foreign affairs, which is before us a lot, that's part of their job, is to do the travel. And they're before us probably more than any other committee, but that's part of their job. Mr. Jans, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Perhaps just, again, Mr. Julian, the committees you listed, indeed, those are the ones that embarked upon some very extensive consultations in the last Parliament. So, for instance, the Finance Committee on an annual basis undertakes its pre-budget consultation process, where it divides in two and travels literally all across Canada, meets with many witnesses. The Government Operations Committee, of course, undertook a very large study on Canada Post, so there too they were meeting with a lot of witnesses, more witness expenses, etc., and the associated travel to meet people in their communities. In terms of cost for an average kind of vanilla committee meeting, very difficult to calculate because it depends what you include in the sandbox. There are the immediate costs for room setup, the clerk, etc. But then you have, of course, staff from the Library of Parliament that are assigned. You have all the back of the room people who were involved, the IT people, and that. Trying to ascertain how much or what percentage of all that falls into part is a bit of a challenge.
I understand. Has that ever been done? And I've been here for 13 years. I've never seen an estimate of what a standard committee meeting costs. I know there is a lot of money that goes into that because there's a variety of factors, interpretation, even the presentation of the agenda. All of that takes work. There are people working very diligently behind the scenes. But have we ever done on the Hill an estimate of what it costs for a committee meeting?
Not that I'm aware of. We could certainly have a go at it. It would be an interesting exercise, and we can submit that information in due course.
Thank you.
Interesting point.
Not really liaison committee, but I'm glad you asked the question. Mr. Strahl?
Thank you, Ms. Grove, for your presentation. I did notice a change, certainly last year in advance of what I assume was a pre-budget ask, where you were actually asking committee chairs on the committees I was a part of to basically tell you any trip you'd like to take. Like, just think of the trip that you'd like to take. At least, certainly this was the case in the committees I was on. It was kind of I thought it was an effort from liaison committee, rather than the other way up, here's a trip we'd like to take, what do you think? There was an effort to kind of flush out what the appetite was for travel from each committee. So I believe you asked the chairs that. Can you speak to why that was done? Why was there that effort to kind of maybe encourage committees to travel more, or to consider that more than they had in the past?
Well, clearly we recognize the importance of what committee travel, the benefits for every committee that I have ever been on. Any of the travel that I have done, I have come back from that travel, which is, as you know, this is not pleasure travel when you travel with committees. It's a lot of work. You usually come back to the house pretty exhausted from whatever travel experience you were doing. I think it was encouraged that committees, a lot of new members that we had here, that opportunity. Plus, it's part of the commitment from the government is for us to be reaching out and communicating and giving people that opportunity. But more importantly, Mrs. Strahl, the issue here was to try to get an idea of what the expenses and where we were heading. As you know, we came back to the board, and the board was kind enough to recognize the work of the committees and how important, because there just was not enough money. So in a planning program, the earlier you know what the committees are planning to study, where they might want to travel, helps the liaison committee deal with the finances. As Mr. Jans indicated, the earlier a committee knows it's going to do some travel, the better prices you get on hotels and on flights.
Okay.
So it was an effort to be more efficient with everybody's time and to watch the dollars more carefully.
On the dollars on the pages 74 and 75, as had been referenced, it talked about 240 more meetings. I think you were referring to 240 more than 2012, 2013, at a cost of $1.77 million more, so an extra $7,400 for each of those meetings. So there was a big increase, certainly, in costs for those. I wanted to get into it. I think it's not directly related to what Mr. Julian said, but just based on some quick calculations here, in 2012, 2013, the cost per meeting, if we want to compare the two tables, was $1,305. In 2013-14, the cost was $1,158. And in 2016-17, the cost was $2,359. So over $1,000 per meeting more, based on the information that we've been provided. What do you attribute that additional $1,000 per meeting to, on average? And maybe I'll let you go to that one first before I go to my next question.
I'm going to let Mr. Jantz deal with it, but I would suggest that having the audience participation is an important factor that has really shown tremendous results. You don't just have designated witnesses, you actually encourage people to come out and talk to the committee members. And I think that might be one of the parts that has increased, but that's part of our job as parliamentarians, is doing that outreach, giving people opportunity to comment, whether you're talking about finance or any of the other ones. But I'll let Mr. Jantz respond further.
Sure, and maybe just to add, Mr. Strahl, some committees embark upon site visits, which aren't official committee meetings on the road. So there are costs that are included, but if you try to link them with a meeting, the math maybe doesn't quite work out, because that's not a meeting of the committee. It's an important, I guess, evidence-seeking exercise the committee undertakes, but it's not linked to a meeting per se. And we've seen more site visits, more travel recently, as the tables indicate, but not necessarily a direct correlation with meetings.
Right. I guess I do find it, it is interesting that at a time when actually committee memberships went down from 12 to 10 MPs, in 3 years, and I know the government has driven this largely, but there's been, from 2013 to 2016, there's a doubling of the cost per meeting. So I would suggest that that's not insignificant, and yes, perhaps there's more, but I certainly, I think I want to flag that. Just the committees do important work, yes, but we've doubled the cost of committees, and we heard in the previous presentation about the need to significantly increase the technology and the staff for video conferencing so that we reduce those costs. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how we, the cost in government goes always ever higher, but doubling in 3 years and an additional requirement for systems that are supposed to reduce the cost of meetings, I think committees are encouraged wherever possible to hold a video conference instead of traveling or instead of flying in witnesses at great cost. So I just want to flag that it is a little concerning to me. The costs have escalated and are escalating on not only on the travel, but on the technology side, and I think we just have to be mindful of that.
Maybe just to add one more thing, there has been an increase in travel, including international travel. Internationally, a committee can't even hold a meeting for all sorts of privilege and constitutional jurisdiction reasons. So all those costs, again, you kind of have to take them out of the equation of calculating a per meeting request, because again, in the last few years, there was very, very little committee travel, both within Canada and certainly internationally. Another way you could perhaps do the math is look at a per report or a per study amount of money as opposed to a per meeting, but points well taken.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Groh. Any comments on these estimates? No approval. No approval. Okay. So we go on then. (2017), and I'm going to hand it over to the clerk, Monsieur Robert, when you're ready.
Merci beaucoup.
Very much. Mr. Chair.
Alors, j'ai l'honneur de présenter.
I have the honor to introduce the report to Canadians for 2017 to the Board of Eternal Economy. As you see in the table of contents, you'll see that we're presenting a report that was based on two themes: members and the administration. The report to Canadians is a report that is annual. It presents information, statistics on members and their various parliamentary activities for the 2016-17 fiscal year. The report also includes information about the administration of the House. To decrease paper use, the report will be available electronically on the website of the House once it is approved by the Board of Eternal Economy.
Minor. La section sur les députés contient.
Section on members, it contains information about the characteristics of them as a group. There are demographic characteristics, geographic ones, and a breakdown by political party. This information includes the men-women proportion and the number of MPs who were born outside of the country. This is an indicator of our inclusivity.
On parliamentary work. There is information on sitting days of the House, as well as the number of bills introduced by the government and private members. The report also provides stats on committee meetings, witnesses heard, and reports presented. Finally, there are general figures about activities related to parliamentary diplomacy carried out through the various associations. The second part of the report focuses on the administration and what it accomplished over the last fiscal year, and among the highlights are the deployment of a new financial management system, the reopening of the Wellington building with offices for 70 members and 10 committee rooms, the launch of a renewed House of Commons website, including a social media presence that encompasses Twitter and Instagram accounts. And the administration is also proud of the fact that it has a 2017 designation as a top employer for young people. So once this report is approved by the board, it will be made public and tabled in the House. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Ms. Jagger.
Thank you. I actually found the report quite interesting, and I like the fact that we shared the diversity. Being on Parliament Hill, what I've seen about this government has really been about engaging with younger people and them seeing themselves in the chairs in the House of Commons, which I think is part of the strength of our country. As you know very well that our Prime Minister says that diversity is our strength, not just the shelves we occupy, but the perspectives that we bring and so forth. So I know that oftentimes it turns into cost savings. I do think we have a responsibility to the public to ensure that they know what's happening on Parliament Hill. So I know that it is exclusively available online, as you were saying. I would love to know what's behind that decision. Is it just cost savings, or was there just no appetite to have it distributed? I'll ask you a couple of questions, and then you can share with me. And I'd also ask, is there opportunities to make sure that we are making this report available to schools, let's say, or a way to work better with provinces and territories and municipalities? Grade 5 students in Ontario, at least, learn about government. I've been visiting many schools. This is something that I think I would definitely be sharing with them. So it's an opportunity to meet, for them to see themselves reflected as to the work that happens on Parliament Hill. I think sometimes people believe that it is just two sides going at each other, but often I think members would agree that we work very well together to ensure that we are delivering for Canadians. And I also think about the fact that it's at the end of the year, and as we end one year, we look at the opportunities and challenges of the next. Is there an opportunity perhaps for us to continue learning and knowing, so that we can be proactive rather than reactive? So we know about committees traveling. We know that we are engaging not with only Canadians in Canada, but with the world. Are we looking at perhaps some constructive ideas as to what the government and members should be considering so that we're preparing for future years, and so forth? Thank you.
I'm not sure I'll be able to provide you a very meaningful answer with respect to the last point that you raised. I think in terms of whether the report should be available in paper as opposed to electronically, I think that's just part of a general drive on the part of administration to reduce paper utilization. However, when there is a demand that expresses a need and a preference, I think we'd be quite prepared to make copies available. With respect to making it available to schools, well, it's certainly going to be available to schools if they access the House of Commons website. Both the House of Commons and the Senate try to maintain a very close relationship with school groups through what was Encounters Canada, the Forum for Young Canadians. Just a few weeks ago, we had our annual Teachers Institute, and there we build up relationships. And I'm going to be having meetings with the Association of Former Parliamentarians to see if we can work at building alliances with them across the country so that they can become recruiters as well as informers to school groups, as well as that includes the students themselves as well as the teachers, so that the relationship between Parliament and our future citizens and the teachers of those future citizens becomes stronger.
I just want to point out much of the kind of materials that are available for schools are from the Library of Parliament that has excellent materials that are tuned to different age levels and grade levels.
And in terms of the changing composition of Parliament, which is highlighted in this report, well, I think that reflects a reality that we increasingly appreciate.
Excellent. And I've asked this question about other things in the past. I wonder if we have stats and data about how many people are viewing the report, to see how many people we are actually engaging with, and do we have the number?
We do have some stats. General numbers, it seems to have been there were 5,000 hits on the last report to Canadians. And so we hope that we can improve that. Again, there's no compulsion. The access to the House of Commons website is perfectly voluntary.
Your enthusiasm lets me know that we are in good hands, so we look forward to building on that together. Thank you.
Mr. Straw.
Yes, thank you. Question that, basically a couple of numbers popped out at me. Of course, on page 8, the numbers are no longer accurate, and I'm just wondering if because this is going online, because I assume you'll pick a date and launch it. I just wondered why on all of these statistics, I don't think it would take a lot of graphic design to change a few numbers, but
no.
I don't know. I guess yes, it is a snapshot from March 31st, 2017. But I guess my question would be, if it's going to be an online product, why wouldn't we just update those numbers so that they're accurate on the day it's posted?
I think if you go to other sources, you can update the figures, but this is actually based on the fiscal year. So it goes from April 1st of the previous year to March 31st of the current year. And if we no longer want it to be an annual report, and we want it to be more of a dynamic document, it would be possible to do that, but I think we would probably want to do it on another site. It's the same thing with, for example, the library produces Legisinfo, And that's being constantly updated because of the activities both in the House and the Senate with respect to the consideration of legislation. It just depends on what kind of document you want to call it. If it's going to be an annual report, I think it's going to be fairly static, but if it's meant to be an ongoing document, then we could do that. We'll also have to change the numbers of the birth years of the youngest and the oldest of the oldest MP.
I think if it is a statutory, if it's a requirement for this to be in this format, to be an annual report, I think, quite frankly, the fact that we're no longer printing these shows you, like, the era of the annual report is probably passing us by, and we may want to look at that. I assume this is a requirement, and so I don't have a major problem with it. I think if we, again, if we're going to online versions of things, that there'd be some value in just keeping it all up to date. That's it.
I guess it strikes me that, I mean, there is I can see an argument for having on an annual basis a report like this, right? And if you look at the inside front cover across from the table of contents, it says period of this report, April 1, 2016 to March 31, 2017. I take your point, but I also think there's an argument for having that annual, process of having to be accountable in the way that this is doing in relation to a fiscal year. It's been long been the practice. Now the thing is, if there's a direction to change that, that's something to be discussed, obviously. But that's my point.
The point also matters. Then, how do you calculate the number of meetings of a committee? Because if it's during the course of the Parliament, or if it's a session, if the session lasts 2 years, then you're going to have a number that will accumulate until the new session, and you just ratchet back to 0 or 1. And so I guess, as the Speaker pointed out, it's within this fixed period of time there have been these many meetings and this much activity.
Mr. Julian.
J'aime beaucoup le rapport. Merci beaucoup.
Like your report, thank you very much. There's still a lot of work to be done to have fairness at the House, or I just wanted to suggest that's what we see on the floor of the House of Commons. So we should really, it should encourage us to work on gender equity, to look at the number of men and women in the House. This is a motivation for everyone when we see in this report that even though we've made some progress, there's still work to be done.
The financial statements at the end, because I think they're very useful, but only if we have them in the context of previous years. We're spending $500 million of Canadians' money, 167 million in terms of House administration, and I honestly don't know what the totals were for last year, or the year before that, or the year before that. And I think in terms of constant dollars, because of course there's an inflation component that we have to keep in mind. So in constant dollars, you could actually see an increase that isn't an increase. We know that. But it would be helpful, I think, for Canadians to actually know what we are spending of their money in terms of House administration, and what the democratic costs of government are. The amounts are considerable, understandable given the work that we do, but it would be helpful to have those previous years.
Mr. Julian, would you think that, it seems to me that if you had a chart showing the previous 5 years, for example, I think that's a great idea. That should be helpful, and I think we can do that in the next one, after the end of this fiscal year for the next report. Well, Mr. Julian still has the floor if he wants to allow you to intervene.
On that idea, which I thought was interesting, if I can, Peter. If we do that, we should just elaborate in an election year, like note that it's an election year, because Canadians who look at a 5-year time frame, necessarily an election year has some increased costs of new members, but it also has committees travel less during a writ period, clearly. So I would just find a way to, if we're going to do it, let's be as descriptive as we can be to reflect the reality of those time periods. That's all.
Yeah,
I'm with that.
30 new members.
We'll certainly make an effort to provide, we will provide that information and we will contextualize it so that it's not misunderstood.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? No? All right. Thank you very much. In that case, there's no number 6. So thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.